you you'd left, and then things really started ramping up. Obviously, you could never be. You were always the co-founder of Thumbtack, but was it tough watching from the sidelines and seeing that, all of that stuff blow up?
Yeah, well, yeah, after I left, probably that was the lowest point in my life by far.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Another episode of The Art of the Fail, Season 2. We have another awesome guest as usual. Today we are joined by Jeremy Tunnell, co-founder of Thumbtack. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So as always, we're just going to hop right into our Q&A, previously called Rapid Fire Questions. Not so rapid. Everyone will find out why in a little minute, but yeah, let's get to it. So Jeremy, first question. What did you eat for breakfast this morning?
I had bacon and eggs. I have bacon and
Nice.
eggs every morning.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm an egg guy every morning too, actually. I once used to limit that, and this is why I say it's not a rapid Q&A, because I'll just go off on a tangent about eggs. But yeah, I'm an egg guy every day too. Question number 2, coffee or tea? And out of those two, how many cups in a day?
So I'm gonna go with tea, cause I am very careful with caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you should save it for when you need it.
Yep.
And I used to work with a guy, and he would have a pot of coffee before lunch, and a pot
Sounds
of
like
coffee
Christian.
after
Sounds
lunch.
like me.
No, I mean, I mean, he'd been doing it for like 20 years. Obviously, it worked for him.
Yeah.
But man, I really love the feeling of it's 11 or 12 at night, and I really need to push through on something,
Mm-hmm.
and I can have a cup of coffee, and that gets me through.
Gets you
So
through it, yeah.
it's kind of a it's an upper instead of having to drink coffee just to be normal,
Mm-hmm.
which
Well,
is what a lot of my friends say that they drink coffee to do.
That's kind of where I'm at right now. I wake up in the morning, put a pot of coffee on because it's so normal to me now, and
Right.
by 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock, that whole pot is gone. I was telling Chris actually last night, I kid you not, I was about to have my 5th cup of coffee at around 10 o'clock, and I went to go heat it up in a microwave, and I was like, why are you having 5 cups of coffee? Like, maybe if
Right.
that was my 2nd or my 3rd one, I would have been like, okay, that's fine. But on the 5th cup, and that was espresso too, it's just like, no.
On the way over here, you were having a bit of a moment. I had to give you a pep talk, and I said, "Hey, buddy, there's a Tim Hortons up there. You want to get a coffee?"
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So I'll admit I'm drinking decaf tea right now.
Okay.
How ridiculous is that, right?
No, you know what? Actually, I think I'm having like a life moment right now where I need to scale back on my coffee and my caffeine. This is getting too much. This is getting out of hand for me. Third question, Apple or Android?
I'm on Apple, just because I want something that works with the least amount of me fiddling with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I use Windows on my
Okay.
desktop.
Interesting.
And, man, I'm so much of an Apple hater on so many different things. I think iTunes might be the worst user experience of any.
Oh
large
man, it
company.
always has been.
It's
Yeah.
terrible.
Brutal.
I just can't figure out how. Like, all right, so the first product that Apple rolled out was, well, the first consumer product was the iPod, which you put music on, and it's 15 years later, and I can't figure out how to put music on my iPhone. I can't figure it out. Like, I have some, and I've got it in a folder, and I think you can put it into a playlist, but the playlist never shows up, and then I get it there, and then it won't sync, and I don't know. I still don't have any
And you
music
would think
on.
that would be the feature. Given
You
that's
would
where
think
it started.
that would be the feature. I know.
I think
I still deal with it because it works for everything else.
Yeah, my beef with iTunes is I can never close it. It'll just pop up, and I keep pressing close, and it doesn't.
I've had that battle with iTunes
doesn't
myself.
want to close
Right.
down, and I don't.
Or
I don't
it
get
pops up with the file explorer when you
Right.
don't need it, but when you do need it, you can't
You
get it.
can't
to
get
pop
it
up.
to pop up. I
Yeah.
know.
Look, I could go on all day, but
Yeah, right.
They make good phones, you
Yeah,
know.
They do.
I mean, minus the software. So
Hustle or IQ? Which one would you pick if you were, let's say, building a company again and you were going after even your first hire?
yeah, I mean, it's almost all hustle, I think.
Mhm.
Really. I talk to a lot of people about startups, and if you don't have hustle, it never starts, right? Like you never move, you never
Yeah.
do anything.
Yeah.
And if you don't do anything, then you can't be successful. So, yeah, and I think a lot of really smart people, I think sometimes they just want to play around with the ideas in their mind.
Yeah.
Right.
I think they like the idea of thinking through business ideas. I think they like talking about it with other people, but it takes a special type of person to be like, you know, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to try this thing and I might fail.
Right.
Yeah, definitely hustle, I would say.
Love it.
We like to keep those people honest here on this show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great answer, too. I love that answer. So this one is actually kind of like a personal curiosity. How did your team come up with, when you guys were starting Thumbtack, how did you guys come up with the name, and were there any other names that were kind of thrown about or in the hopper before landing on that one name?
Right. So yes, there was a previous name. For anybody who's ever started a company, you're doing the naming game. You go online, you try to find out if the .com is available, right?
Yeah.
And it never is. So we had a small amount of seed money to get us a year. We raised $100,000, and that was going to get us a year. There was 2 of us. There was eventually going to be 4 of us. We didn't want to spend any money on the domain name because we had to use the money on everything else, like living.
Right.
But the name that we had, Marco came up with the name. I hated it, and I threatened to quit if we stuck with it. And as soon as I say it, you will know instinctively why I hated it. So the name was timestrapped.com.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I
Right.
probably would have threatened to quit too.
I mean, just the images.
Yeah.
I was like, Marco, I can't do it. I can't do this.
Cover
So-
of TechCrunch.
Wow.
Your mug.
So Marco actually came up with Thumbtack.
Okay.
And that was our alternate idea, and we were like, this is it.
Yeah.
This is awesome. You know, we were trying to go with the bulletin board type theme. And so, man, I can't remember how much we paid for that domain name. I want to say we paid $25,000.
That seems about
So
right.
a fourth of our seed money
Yep.
just for the name.
Well, it paid off.
But it was worth it.
Yeah.
We had investors tell us over and over again that they get a big stack of pitches, and they usually don't look through many of them. But they said, look, if these guys can get Thumbtack, then they're worth a second look. So, yeah, you know, it was a huge piece of our seed money, and it hurt to write that check. But I don't regret it, because branding is super important.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
timestrap.com is not the branding that I want to work under.
Did you guys have that domain? You had that, right? For
We
a year.
may still have it.
Yeah.
Who knows? So if anybody's interested, I'm
Timestrap.com
deal.
might be available for purchase.
I don't know what industry you're in, but
Well, I could probably name a few, but all right, last question. And again, sorry because that was not so rapid, but
sure,
fun nonetheless. So last and arguably most important question: are you ready to officially get started and start talking about some failures?
let's do it.
Awesome, I love it. So in that Calendly booking system that we had, you had filled out a couple of different topics that you want to talk about, and we just had this conversation between the three of us, how it kind of seemed like they all fell into place chronologically, at least how you wrote them down.
Why don't we start in the beginning?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, what your childhood was like. This always often ends up like being like a shrink appointment, but I think you'll get a lot of value out of it.
I think your voice is probably not soft enough for this one. I need an NPR type voice. So I grew up in East Tennessee, in a smallish town called Johnson City. Probably the most normal suburban American life that you could ever imagine.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the University of Tennessee. I studied computer engineering. Mostly because I couldn't think of anything else to do, and because my parents told me that you study something that you could get a job in, and everybody gets a job in engineering. So,
what did your parents do?
My dad was a police officer,
Okay,
and my mom stayed home with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like I said, pretty traditional middle-class American upbringing.
Yep.
So while I was in college, I took advantage of this work-study program. So I worked at a company called Adtran in Huntsville, Alabama, for 2 years out of my undergrad. So my undergrad took 6 years. So, I had that experience of after 4 years, all my friends left, and I'm still back in undergrad, still working on this stuff. And so after college, I was so tired of engineering. I was just so tired of it. And I just had this idea one day that I wanted to do something totally different. So I decided to move to Washington, D.C. and get a job working in Congress on the Hill. So I managed to score an internship. And so I moved up to D.C. I had no job, no prospects, like couple $1,000s to cover rent. Managed to find a room in a house for like $500 a month, which was pretty good. And so I did a couple of internships, and then I was ready to go out, and I was going to start from the bottom. I was going to serve coffee and make copies, and I was going to do the best coffee and copies that anybody ever did. And I papered my resume across Washington, and nobody would call me back. And it just kept going on, and weeks would go by, and I would get no callbacks. And I would follow up, and I would write thank you letters, and nothing. And so finally, I arranged this interview with the Armed Forces Committee. Like, all right, so what? I don't care where I start, right? Give me a chance.
Yep.
And so they needed a receptionist, which is like not even a staff assistant. It's like, staff assistant on probation, basically. And my whole job is to answer the phone, which I'll admit, there are a few things in life that I'm really bad at, and answering the phone and using a fax machine are two things that I just can't do. But anyway, I faked it. And so I go in, and like, it's a receptionist position. So I figured that the interview would be, tell me about your hobbies, where are you from, whatever, like, make sure that you can talk and that you're personable. And so this lady comes in, and she says, well, so I want you to know that this is a very competitive position. It will be a 3-stage interview process. Did you lose me?
We did for a second.
Did for a second. I think
that was the weirdest shit.
Back up.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, how about that? Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. Can you just rewind like a minute?
Right. So at what point
I think
was a minute
we lost
ago.
you. So you thought it would have been like a very easy
Right.
an echo?
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. Okay. You thought it would have
Okay.
been an easy interview process, but then you went into it, and then she's like, "Yeah, it's going to be a 3-step interview." That's
Right.
I think that's where we lost you.
Yeah. So so I went into this job interview, thinking that it was going to be one of these interviews where they come in and they ask you like, what are your hobbies, just to make sure that you are personable. And I was really not prepared. And so this lady comes in and she says, so this is a very competitive position. There will be a 3-stage interview process. This is the first stage. We'll let you know if you make the second stage. And then she proceeded to just hit me with all of the worst interview questions, stuff that I'd never even thought about answering, especially the one which I hate. And I almost will get up and walk out if I get this in an interview. But what is your greatest weakness? Okay. all that says is like, do you have an answer that's canned that isn't a weakness, but it's actually a strength, right?
Right.
So it's just so dumb. But I can't remember what I said. But after it came out of my mouth, I was like, that was not the right answer. So I left and I felt like it didn't go well, but maybe it went okay because it's a receptionist position. And I never got a call back. They didn't even call me back to tell me I didn't make the second stage. I just didn't get a call back. And man, that was that. There have been a few really low points in my life, and that was the first one. And I was just like, what can I do if I can't even get a job answering a phone, right? And so that basically was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I got so bored staring at the walls at home that I decided to go volunteer. And I went and I volunteered for this this organization that was working on Social Security reform. And I just walked in the door and I said, "Look, what can I do for you? I can do all kinds of stuff." And 2 days later, I was their tech guy. I was there for almost 2.5 years.
Wow.
We were saving the world together. We made like $1,000 a month, barely enough to pay food and living. And it was one of the best times of my life. And I met my co-founders at Thumbtack.
Awesome.
So what was the inspiration behind you actually getting up and leaving your hometown just to go? Like you mentioned it briefly, but what actually, I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. About like what motivates people that need to just pick up and leave.
Yeah. So I guess if you don't grow up in an area like I did, you don't really get it. But there's not like it's one of these places where you don't know anybody that went to Harvard, right? Like this is what kids do on TV and in the movies.
That's where I grew up.
And so I like when I got into college at the University of Tennessee, I got a scholarship, and my guidance counselor, like, she wrote me down as like one of her big successes for the year. Great, you did great. And nobody really gave me the idea that you could go and do these bigger things. And I remember I was at my internship in Alabama, and I was talking to one of the other guys in the program, and we were getting offers, and they were making job offers, and I'd gotten a job offer to come and work for them. And I was just talking to him, and I was like, I got an offer, and he was like, "Yeah, I did too." And I was like, Are you gonna? He was like, "Are you gonna take it?" And I was like, "Yeah, probably." And I said, "Are you gonna take yours?" And he said, "No way. Like, there are way bigger things to do in this world." And I don't know. I mean, I have no idea why that thing said to me at that point just hit me in a certain way. But it was just like, I've never even thought about the fact that there may be bigger things to do out there. Like I was
Right.
just thrilled that I got a job offer, and my dad told me it was the greatest thing ever, and it was more money than, he'd made half of his career.
Yeah.
And it was just nobody stopped to think and say, there are huge things to do out there, and if you take some chances, you can do big things. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why, but that
Yeah,
was
it's
that was the
fascinating.
moment, and I was just like, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to go take some bigger chances. And um, then my dad was really angry at me when I turned down a guaranteed job to go work for free in
Yeah.
DC. But
Yeah.
Okay.
we
So
think differently.
Yeah.
so then walk us through, you said you met your co-founders of Thumbtack then. Can you walk us
Yeah.
through the next steps? Is that when you sort of came up with the idea for Thumbtack?
No, so we worked on this issue for like 2.5 years,
Hmm.
and then things started to slow down, and I was getting to the point where $1,000 a month really wasn't going to cut it anymore. Like
Right.
I wanted to have a little bit of a life, and 12 grand a year before taxes just it doesn't really do it in DC.
Yep.
So I got a real job offer. It was at a kind of like a lobbying firm type thing, just like a regular job, and they needed a tech person, and they said all the right things. They were like, "Look, everything's a mess. We don't know what we're doing. Come in, do what you want, fix everything, and we'll pay you really well, and you can do some work on your old job too. Like we'll let you
Wow.
handle the stuff that you were doing for the nonprofit." And I was like, "Great, for
Yeah.
like 6 times more money, right?"
Right.
And so I took that job and I stayed there for a couple years. And after a couple years, I'd done everything that I wanted to do. And I was just playing around with stuff, and most of the benefits of automation and everything in the office had already been done. And I was kind of playing around the corners. And when I get to that point, it's time for me to move on and find
Hmm.
something else.
Hmm.
And I was just bored. My life was great, um, but I was bored. And just one day, just Marco called me on the phone, and he was in San Francisco, and he says, "I've got 100 grand, and my brother is in Europe working for his company, and he lent me his house, and he was like, 'Let's start a company.'" And I said, "Okay." And we didn't have an idea. I didn't even know we hadn't even talked about it. But
Wow.
I threw all my stuff in my Honda Civic and I drove out to California and got a place. And then we started talking about ideas.
So
And
you agreed to it before
probably
there was an idea.
my first really bad decision at Thumbtack was the uh, best thing that ever happened to us, because our first idea wasn't my idea. They were like, "All right, what if we what if we designed this system that people could put in their bank accounts, and it would download all of their transactions, and they would have one place for all of their financial assets?" And I thought about it for a while, and I was like, "Look, guys, like I'm one guy, and you want me to contact every bank in the United States and work out some data sharing arrangement and some API and all of this?" I was like, "I can't do it. I couldn't do it with 10 million bucks. Like I would need a huge team." And I mean, at the time, I had no idea that there was this company called Yodlee out there, and Yodlee was the back end for Mint. And Mint launched like a month and a half later, and Patzer did Mint like way better than I could have ever done. So it was just the best thing that ever happened to us that we didn't try to do that. So so we tried to find a plan B, and this is kind of a weird thing because it's been so long, and I have read so many articles that tell the founding story of Thumbtack that I'm not quite sure what the real story is anymore. Because this is how the media
Oh, man.
works. Like
Yeah.
they want a fresh angle every time.
Yeah.
So, you need coverage. You need the media to talk about you because you don't have the money to pay for it. And so when they come to you and they're like, we're going to write an article about you, but we need a fresh approach, like, we don't lie, but for every company, there's like an infinite number of founding stories,
Right.
right? I mean, I could say honestly that we were thinking about doing this services marketplace, and I had been looking for violin lessons, and I was thinking, and I was like, yeah, um, I don't know where I would go find violin lessons if I wanted to get some. And like, yeah, we should make that. I think that would be a thing. Like, this is not out there, and Amazon is the place you go to for things. Why shouldn't there be a place you should go to for services? But to the other guys, I think their idea of the founding story was we just wanted to go after the biggest market that hadn't been tackled yet. And so that, I mean, services is huge. It's as big or bigger than Amazon potentially. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the founding story was, but it was something along those lines.
One of the questions.
And
Can you hear me?
go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I had, which is interesting about Thumbtack and how you guys actually conceptualized it, was how did you pick, like, the violin thing? I assume that's true. How did you pick?
Yeah.
Did you pick a vertical, or how did you end up making the horizontal sort of platform play work?
Yeah.
Yeah. So every investor that we talked to said that we needed to pick a vertical, and most of the remaining investors said that we needed to pick a geographic region and start from there. And back then that was just the assumed way of doing things. And we were just naive, and we didn't know that we couldn't succeed. And that's what I boil down the whole story to, is that we just didn't know that things couldn't be done. And so when people told us that things couldn't be done, we just didn't believe them. We were like, no, we're different. Like, we're going to do it differently. We've got this.
That's crazy. So that's actually really fascinating. I've never heard that or thought about it that way, where like the ignorance could possibly be one of the reasons for succeeding.
Driving factors.
Oh, I mean, if we knew what we were getting into, I would know. I mean, if you had told me what was going to be involved in this, but not knowing the outcome, there's no way I would have done this over again. Like, it was way bigger than I could have ever imagined, with way more problems. I mean, a two-sided marketplace is the hardest thing in the world to start.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, at one point we had an investor who said, I love your team and I love your attitude, but I hate your idea, and I'll give you the money right now all you have to do is agree that you're going to come up with a different idea. That was it. And like it just wasn't even a thing that we were going to consider. Like, I think when Marco told me what he said, we didn't even really seriously considered it. He just said it as a joke, like, this is what this guy wanted, and I was like, okay, well, I guess we'll find somebody else to give us some money. But yeah, it was we just had no idea what we were getting into. And once you're in the middle of it, then you go into this I don't want to say crisis mode, but it kind of is a little bit. It's like triage. There are 10 billion things to do, and you just can't possibly think about all the things, because if you thought about all the things, you would just quit. So you just look at the next thing on the list and you're like, okay, the next thing on the list is I got to do this. And every day you get up out of bed, you walk to your desk. I walk to my desk because we slept at the office.
Yeah.
You get up, you walk to your desk, and you just look at the next thing on the list and you do the next thing. And you keep doing the next thing until you've done a bunch of things.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty soon, you've done a lot of things and you can't even imagine all the stuff that you've done. Yeah, I'm not saying that's the only way to do things, and I'm not even saying that's the best way to do things. It's probably better if you're 40 years old and you've done 10 companies and you know how not to make all the mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that would be a great way to start a company. But if you can't have the experience, then give me the naive, like, fresh outlook any day of the week. Because you'd be surprised what you can get through.
Can you hear me through this?
Yeah, a little bit.
I thought the sound went
enough.
Still talking to that.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of take a couple steps back to that point where you got that call and he was like, hey, come down to San Fran. We're going to start a business. What was, like, your relationship must have been phenomenal between the two of you in order for him to just call you up and then you agreeing to that. What was your relationship like over those, I guess, was it 2.5 years that you were working on the other project before, or even longer than that? You guys had known each other.
Yeah, it was about 2.5 years. I mean, this wasn't totally out of left field.
Mm-hmm.
Like the invitation was totally out of left field, but over the last couple of years, we had talked, when we go out for happy hour or whatever, we'd all dreamed of like starting a company someday.
Right.
I'm not sure any of us were really serious,
Mm-hmm.
but it was just something you do, like, oh yeah, the future's great. Like, we could do great things. What could we possibly do? And it was just a fun thing to talk about. But no, I never thought that it would actually happen or that I would have the opportunity. And without him providing the opportunity, I'm not sure that I would have ever said, yeah, this is a thing that I need to do.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
Had none of you started a company before that?
No, just,
Wow.
I mean, we were super young. I mean, I think I was the oldest of all four of us at 25 or 26, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they were younger. I mean, I think Jonathan was like 22 or 23.
Right.
So like we had all, when we were working at the nonprofit, half of them were still in school. And like one of the guys took a leave of absence from college to like come and work on this thing. So we were all, really young. Yeah, it was just, it was nothing that I'd ever thought of, but if the opportunity showed itself, sure, why not? Like, I was bored.
Yeah.
I'd managed to save up a little bit of money because I was making decent money at the thing. So it was not like I didn't have enough money to move there and get an apartment for a few months.
Right.
And, like I said, just being naive, I didn't think it's this really weird place that your brain is in. And I don't know if anybody else out there will understand what I'm saying, but like for the whole first year, I never thought we could succeed, but I never thought there was a chance we would fail.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I know when it comes out of my mouth, it makes no sense. But, when he called me and said, let's start a company, my brain just said, yeah, that's the most natural thing that I can imagine right now. Like, that's obviously what I should be doing.
Yep.
And so I didn't even have to think about it for 5 minutes. It was just like, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
It sounds like boredom was a huge motivator for you to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to seek out challenges and opportunities, and I think it's tough when you have a really cushy job
Yeah.
And this was a really cushy job. Like, I had no idea how cushy the job was that I had. When I left, they sent me my Cobra statement, the temporary health insurance thing,
Okay.
where they say, we'll keep you on our plan, but now you have to pay the premiums.
Mm-hmm.
And this was back in like 2005, and they were paying like $950 a month for my health insurance premiums.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
I had a pension. at this place. Like,
and how old were you? 25, 24?
Yeah, I was like 24, 25. And it was like, I didn't know what benefits were.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought this was standard stuff that comes with any job. And I go from, a pension and a 401k and a good salary and health insurance that pays everything
Mm-hmm.
to the startup where, I think we agreed on $2,000 a month. So I made
Mm-hmm.
$2,000 a month. We had health insurance, but it was a catastrophic plan, which basically means you pay cash for everything.
Yep.
No 401k, no pension, and some shares, right? That are going to be worth a lot of money someday. That's what everybody says.
Yeah.
I just had no idea what I was leaving. And again, being naive, I think really helps, because if I'd known, it would have been a harder decision.
Yeah.
But at the time, it's just perfectly natural.
Yeah.
All
That's
right, this is
awesome.
the next step.
Well, speaking of challenges and taking the leap, what was one of the biggest challenges while you were at Thumbtack? I think we chatted briefly about one. What stands out to you, and how'd you overcome that?
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of challenges. Like I said, every day was like triage. So you had to just focus on the challenge that was in front of you at the time. We talked about the first big product idea that we had. So, we're building this marketplace, and we have some idea of how people are going to use it,
Mm-hmm.
which was totally wrong. And that's always the case.
Yep.
You're always
Always,
wrong about how your
always.
users are going to use your product. And so this was our big dream, is that we wanted to remove all the friction from the process. So if somebody needed a dog walker or a house cleaner or a mover or whatever, we wanted you to be able to come to the website, put it in, and then we'll deliver you immediately some options. And you can book them right there on this smart calendar, right? Because we know when these service providers are going to be available. This was not something that I had to fight for. We were all on the same page. Like, we all shared this vision. We were like, this has to happen. We have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent 6 months programming. I wrote a calendar from scratch. And again, if I'd known how hard it was to write a calendar from scratch, I would not have done it. But once you're halfway through, you're halfway through. So you might as well just keep going.
You got to stick to it.
Dealing with time zones is a nightmare.
Oh, my CTO would have a good conversation with you.
Yeah. But it's not just that. The biggest thing that we didn't realize is this is the first rule of UX. Whenever I talk to somebody who's starting out, if you ever find yourself saying, but all the user has to do is blank, you've failed.
Yeah.
Like, that is a UX fail.
Mm-hmm.
And we designed this thing, and I said, but all the user has to do is log in every week and put in their schedule. Right?
Uh-oh.
I mean, so stupid. And so 6 months of work, and I was so proud of this thing. And, it was this awesome Ajax calendar, no page loads. Everything was there. There was an interface that the service providers could upload their schedules every week. They could do it in various ways. If they wanted to say, I'm just available 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, it would automatically fill in the calendar, and then you could take out spots. Yeah. God, I think maybe 100 service providers did it once or twice. And, then we had this ridiculous, logarithmic drop off. It was the biggest product failure that I could ever imagine. It was the wrong product at the wrong time, thinking through the wrong users. And we knew it really quickly. We knew it in a couple weeks that this thing wasn't going to work. And we had a meeting, and they were like, we gotta bail. And so I went and I deleted the whole thing out of our source code repository.
6 months.
And it was
6 months.
It was one of the
code.
hardest things I ever did, because I wanted to believe that we could salvage it. I wanted to believe that there was something we could do, but there wasn't, and it was the best option.
But it sounds like you came to that pretty quickly. Did it help because, obviously your co-founders, whoever else was involved in that decision, had to do the tough love as well?
Well, but the thing was, it wasn't really tough love. Like,
the writing was on the wall.
There was no way that you could look at the numbers and declare any sort of it wasn't even arguable. I would have been an idiot to try to argue, right?
But instead of scrapping it, you could have iterated or something. Yeah,
well, it's not like it took 5 minutes. Like, we talked through the options we could think through. We thought about adding a feature where people could attach their calendars, in some standard format, and it would automatically fill in or whatever. But it wouldn't have fixed the problem. That was the problem we had to wrestle with for like the first 2 years. And that problem was, how do you sign people up when you're really not going to give them any value? Because as a two-sided marketplace, you have to sign up service providers, and then you have to sign up consumers.
Right.
And those are two completely separate businesses with two completely separate marketing plans.
Yep.
And you got to do one at a time. And so, you got to sign up these service providers, knowing, and you feel bad about this, but you're like, this is what we have to do. We have to sign them up, and we know we can't get them any business immediately, right? And so the next thing that we did was we said, how can we create a feature that works for these guys without them having to have consumers on the product, which was probably the biggest success that we ever had. And we just knew that all of our service providers were posting their services on Craigslist, and all of their posts were ugly, and they were poorly formatted. And I spent a weekend, and I got together with our designer, and we made a pretty Craigslist poster. And we used the information from the Thumbtack profile, and all you had to do was sign up with Thumbtack. And as soon as your Craigslist post expired, we would repost it for you. So you would know that automatically your post was always at the top.
Oh, nice.
And,
interesting.
People loved it.
Yeah.
And I think people would have signed up just for that. If that was our only product, we could have run with that, and we could have, then what? Well, you don't want to build a product on somebody else's platform. So we wouldn't have.
I concur.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, so that was that was the first time at Thumbtack that we actually took a deep breath, and we were like, things are going to be okay, at least for a while, because our service providers were happy. We weren't necessarily getting a business through Thumbtack, but we were getting a business through Craigslist.
Right.
And that was the name of the game. And so it allowed us to pivot and work on consumers for a little bit. And then that's just kind of what got everything moving.
So you're starting to see some success. Things are ramping up. And then all of a sudden, it was 2010, I can't speak, 2010 when you decided to leave?
Yeah, it was like mid 2010, mid to late 2010. Yeah.
So what
Um,
happened there?
right.
Why'd you leave? You started a company after
So
that.
so many reasons. This is like the founding story of
Yeah.
Thumbtack.
Yeah.
Probably the two biggest reasons. The first reason is I'd been struggling with RSI and tendonitis since college. I'd had a really big case of tendonitis in college, and I'd managed to get it under control. But the first week at Thumbtack, and I remember we ordered this entry-level Cisco router to run all the stuff in the office. And I got it, and it was supposed to have a graphical interface because I was scared to death to like use a keyboard a lot because I was saving it for programming. And so we got it, and the graphical interface didn't work, and so I had to call, and I had to configure this whole router manually by typing. And I was on the phone with this support guy for 3 hours, and by the time I was off that call, I knew something was not good.
Mm-hmm.
I could feel like my arms and my hands they get really tight, um, and that's the signal that I get that things are not going to be good. Um, so basically, from the first day I started, I had ongoing RSI tendonitis problems every day.
Right.
And, you know, what are you going to do? I'm the tech guy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's no product if I don't make the product. So, like, you just get up in the morning and you do the next thing on the list. And, and I tried all kinds of crazy keyboards. Um, every mouse out there, every
Mm-hmm.
ergonomic mouse that exists. Um, you know, I took Tylenol or Advil every day.
Wow.
At one point, for about a month, it got so bad that I bought Dragon Naturally Speaking, the voice dictation,
Yep.
and I was programming by saying each character individually into the Dragon Naturally Speaking
Wow.
thing. Right. And after about a week of that, I sat down with Marco and I was like, man, we got to have a talk. Like, things are not going well. Um, and he thought the talk was that I wanted to quit.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, no, like, let's keep going. But I told him we may have to hire someone to type for me. Like, I may have to tell them what to type and then they type into the computer for me. But it didn't have to. And I managed through. But by by the time 2 years had gone by,
Mm-hmm.
I just kept pushing this, and I'd been to the doctor. He was like, "You got to stop. Like, you can't do this anymore. You got to have a break. Like, you're
Yep.
you're tearing your tendons apart." Um, so that's one reason, and then the second reason is I'm what Joel Spolsky would call a duct tape programmer. So I have really broad skill sets, but not very deep in anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just make it up as I go along with a lot of stuff. Like, I'm the biggest joke of a system administrator that you've ever existed. Like, uh, Linux and Unix is a huge mystery to me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can set a machine up and then do it again 2 weeks later and it fails for no like, who knows why, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so nobody in computer engineering, they didn't really teach software engineering.
No, they
Right.
They
never
taught theory.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I had a bunch of data structures and all of that stuff, but nobody ever taught me, like, how do you structure a program? So I was doing the best I could, and I had a little experience, but let's be honest, my code was becoming unmaintainable,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't sure how much longer I could really hold the whole thing together. Um, so
You didn't have engineers at the time? Other engineers?
no, it's just me.
Oh, wow.
And then we got an email from a friend of a friend who was at Google. I think he worked in their infrastructure team, and he was bored, and he was like, "I love what you guys are doing. I want to be a part of it." If I'm being totally honest, his
Please do.
opening email was not the best email that I ever received. uh, I think that his intentions were probably good, but his his um, his application for employment consisted of going through my code and finding all of the bugs and then
Right.
explaining to me how to fix them.
Right.
Right.
So like, okay, I get it, but like, don't explain to me SQL injection. Like, I
Yeah.
get it. I'm just
Yeah.
one guy and I missed something, right?
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
okay, right? But yeah, but I as soon as you talk to him, I realized that he was 10 times better than I was at being a programmer. And he had what we needed to get the product to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
It was just obvious, and um and we didn't really have enough money to pay us both. And I was burned out and had all these medical problems. And so again, it was just one of these things. It wasn't tough love. It wasn't everybody knew what had to happen.
It just made sense.
Yeah, I knew what had to happen. My co-founders knew what had to happen. Everybody that worked there knew what had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think we hired this guy, and then maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 months later, I was like, yeah, it's time to get out of here. I've passed on all of the stuff. I mean, he was a 10x programmer.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say 10x, that's like compared to like a normal programmer.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was probably close to a normal programmer. So, there was just not any need for me. And I could have gone on and done like product management or something. But we were so small, you didn't need product management. You didn't need any of that stuff. Like after I left, I think, we only had like a 3 or 4 person tech team.
I was going to ask, so just for some context, how big was Thumbtack at this point? Were you guys blowing up?
No. So I left. The timeline's a little fuzzy at this point, but I think that I left weeks after our A round, and our A round was not the highest point of Thumbtack. I don't know. Somebody wrote another article about this a few months ago, but our A round, we talked to like 50 VCs, and we got one term sheet, and the deal was not great, but we were out of money, and like we were discussing how we were going to cut back if we didn't raise the round, and it was basically a Hail Mary. We're going to cut back on everybody's pay, cut back on any unnecessary expenses, and do a race to revenue, because we were still pre-revenue at the time. It was super scary. I mean, we were literally just about to close the doors, and I don't think we would have made it. I don't think we could have made it to revenue at that point with what we had left. But we raised the A round, and then I think I left a little bit after that. And then Dan did all kinds of great work on the tech back end. And then Sander came up with our genius SEO idea that I had told him was the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And that was we had all these service providers on our platform, and he was like, why don't we do a survey of small business environments in cities and states? And I was just like, this is so dumb, but go ahead and do it anyway. Like, we can try it and see what happens. And I've been working on SEO for years, and in the first couple weeks, I didn't realize how great of an idea it was until things started coming in. But you survey 1,000 service providers in Virginia, right? And every place that surveys great, you send out a press release, and every newspaper wants to cover it. Every politician wants to talk about how great they are, yada, yada, yada. Everybody wants to talk about it. If you survey a place and everybody says it's a horrible environment for doing business, every media institution wants to cover it. Every opposing politician wants to talk about it. We got all kinds of incoming links from .gov sites, which was a huge deal back then. You know, .gov gave you a lot of link juice, I guess. I don't know if they call it that anymore, but yeah.
That matched good with your first name.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
I think they dropped that term. But
so yeah, it gave us time to do that. That blew up our SEO. Then we were having customers come in the door for free. We were converting those for free. We were making money on those. Our unit economics just changed completely.
And you were still with the company at the time?
No, I'd left.
No, you'd
left. I don't know, like 4 months before all of this happened. Yeah, and then all of a sudden Sequoia gives us a term sheet. And when Sequoia gives you a term sheet, then everybody else wants to give you a term sheet.
Yep.
And then you're the cool kid on the block. And 3 weeks ago, nobody took your call. And now people were calling us trying to get meetings. And it was the weirdest thing in the world. And then we closed that round. And then like 8 months later, people want to give us more money. And I think that was Google Ventures. And then sure, I don't know if you remember what it was like back then, but it was kind of like, get it while you can get it. These are the good times, and the bad times are going to come again, because we started the company back when who was it that sent out that famous email with the tombstone on it? You guys remember that?
I've heard of that. I don't know who it
was.
I
want to say it was Union Square Ventures. Fred, I think it might have been Fred, sent out an email to all of his portfolio companies with a big tombstone on it, and he was like, "The end times are coming. Batten down the hatches. Like, you better make sure that you're, not burning money crazy." And that was like the year. That was 2008. That was when we started, right? Yeah. That's the whole financial crisis.
What a bad time to start.
No, it was a great time to start.
In hindsight.
By the time, but we didn't need to raise a bunch of money back then. And so we started the company when there was no money available. And by the time we got to the point where we needed money, then people were ready to give it again. The whole cycle had reversed. And so, we thought it was bad timing, but it ended up being pretty good timing.
Yeah.
And then, when people give you term sheets at great valuations, you take the money and then you figure out what you're how you're going to make this thing work after that.
Yep.
I love the opposite argument to that. It's always funny because you've probably never been handed a term sheet from Sequoia.
Right.
So
it's really hard to say no to that. You're just like,
yeah. So, I'm trying to be mindful of time here, but
sure.
When you'd left and then things really started ramping up, obviously you could never be, you were always the co-founder of Thumbtack, but was it tough watching from the sidelines and seeing that, all of that stuff blow up?
Yeah. It was tough. I basically dedicated my life to this company for 2.5 years. And when I say dedicated my life, I had no social life. I went on one date in 2.5 years. I lived at the office, we ate all of our meals at the office. I hung out with my co-founders. I didn't do anything but work for the whole time. And then all of a sudden you're going 500 miles an hour and then you're going 0 miles an hour. And just that discontinuity in your life, that's hard to deal with. It's also hard to, you don't have any input anymore. Like, I had everybody's email, and I wrote them emails every now and then, like, here's what I think about things. But, I don't have a vote anymore because
Yeah.
I'm not there. And sometimes the company made decisions that I didn't agree with. And, it was all kinds of stuff, from management decisions to structuring the company to what direction we're going to go on the product. And yeah, sometimes I just didn't agree. And, like, I'm not there anymore. Like, thanks for your input, but, you know, we got to go with what we think is best. And I don't blame them. And I certainly, it's hard to argue that they didn't do a killer job after I left.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's tough, but again, it's just all about realizing that you have a role to play, and when your role is over, you need to realize it, and you need to just make peace with that and try not to hold on to things and move on to the next thing after that.
Well, and that's a good segue, I think. Again, want to be mindful of your time, but if you could just quickly share what was next for Jeremy, and obviously it turned out all right. So let's end off on a on a high note. And I know there were struggles through that process, which is interesting. But can you just highlight that a bit?
Yeah. Well, after I left, probably that was the lowest point in my life by far. I don't know what depression is, and I don't know what constitutes clinical depression or not or whatever. But
see, I told you this would be like talking to a psychologist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I hesitate to use the word, but even if the word doesn't apply, I was pretty damn close.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at being unemployed. I had no money left over because I was making $2,000 a month, and all of my money went to living. I moved back home. I lived with my parents for a little while. I didn't know how I was going to support myself because I couldn't type anymore. And how do you I've got a long career ahead of me, hopefully, and Thumbtack may not work out, and my Thumbtack shares may be worth $0. So how am I going to support myself and perhaps a family someday? And what jobs are there to do out there for people who can't type? And I just I couldn't think of anything because all of my skills were programming. And so I struggled, and I was depressed for a few months. But when I get in this low point, there's a time at which I'm just like, enough of this, as my grandpa would say, wallowing in your own stuff. And so I was like, I'm going to have a plan. I'm going to put together a plan. And so I came up with the idea that what can I do that takes what I know and does something that doesn't require a lot of typing. And so I decided to learn user experience and product management. And I was doing an unsuccessful consulting practice, but making enough to pay rent. And I literally got up every morning, and I went on Amazon, and I bought every book that had ever been written on UX and art and design. And I read every book that was out there, and I took notes. And at the end of the summer, I started doing work for free for nonprofits or whatever to build a resume. And then a few months later, I saw a job ad for what at the time I would describe as my dream job. It was product manager at Stack Overflow in New York. And I said, what have I got to lose? And I applied. And I'll admit now, because it doesn't matter, I didn't even know what a product manager did.
Yeah.
Had no idea, like no clue. So I went on Amazon and I bought every book on product management that existed. And I tried to anticipate every question that might be asked about product management. And I had answers like, what methodology do you use to run your team, or like whatever. Like I had all of these answers. But I knew that at the bottom, like I'd run a team and I know how to run a team and I have a good feel for product. I just didn't know what a product manager did at a big company. Mm-hmm. And so it was one of these weird things because I didn't think I had anything to lose, so I wasn't nervous. So I went in and I did the interview and it went really well and they offered me a job. And then I took it and I moved to New York, which I'd always wanted to do. And I had a great 2.5 years there. And then Thumbtack got really big and I was able to sell some of my shares, and I didn't have to work at Stack Overflow anymore. And so I left there and kind of wandered around a little bit for a couple years, and did some cryptocurrency stuff, mm-hmm. and some angel investing and that type of thing. And then like a year and a little bit ago, I got introduced to this guy. It was just a friend of a friend. It was one of these people that when this person says you need to meet another person, you just say yes and you meet them because this person knows things. I don't know how. So I met him, and what was supposed to be a 15-minute chat turned into 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And we were on the same page about everything. And he was like, I want you to look into this thing called integral philosophy. And I said, okay, I'll take a look. And so I went out and I bought some books on it and I started reading. And I was like, man, there's really something to this. And like I know we're at the end of this, and it's not really something that lends itself to an elevator pitch, but
please try.
It's an explanation of the history of politics and consciousness that says that humanity has gone through all of these stages of development, and that these stages of development are accelerating. And recently, in like the last couple hundred years, we've gone through this stage called pre-modernism, and this stage called modernism, and this stage called postmodernism.
Yes.
And these stages and the clashes between the stages are the source of all of our political friction right now.
Right.
And when you read about this and you look at how it applies, it explains so much. It explains so much about how the world works and how people think about politics, and why different parts of the Republican or Democratic Party are fighting with each other, and why different parties are fighting with each other. So I think that there's something here, and I think it's really important. And
very timely.
Yeah. And so I've been spending the last year researching this thing and trying to figure out, is it real, or is it bullshit? Because there's a lot of bullshit out there, and I don't want to be a guy that spreads bullshit. And I'm very close to deciding for sure that it's a real thing. And so that's what I'm working on right now. It's nothing to do with startups or tech or programming or user experience. I'm right now I'm working on like a 10-page introduction to it, that's geared toward a smart regular person. and I'm excited, but but I'm also curious to see what people see in it when they get exposed to it, because I can say that it changed. I don't look at anything the same again, and I look at everyday news, and and I'm like, yeah, I see what's going on. I see all of the different factions, how they're thinking, and why things are working the way they are. And I'll end on this. Um, the second thing I really love about this thing is that it's really positive, because the idea behind these stages of development are that we are moving in a direction, and that evolution is moving forward, and that things are going to get better as we become as we move to deeper and more complex levels of consciousness. And so, it's really hard to find positivity these days,
Yeah.
because no matter what side you're on, everybody says, God, the world's falling apart. We all hate each other.
Yeah.
We're polarized. We're moving in different directions. But when you look at it through this lens of integral philosophy, it says that what we're going through right now has to happen for us to get to something better. And like the just the fact that it gives us this vision and this path to a positive future is huge, I think.
That's crazy. I'm actually super fascinated about that.
Yeah.
And it's cool you admitted that we're going through postmodernism. That's on camera.
Oh, well, we totally are.
Yeah. Yeah, we are.
But there's a stage after postmodernism.
Right.
Postmodernism is not the end.
Oh.
So, I'm happy to report to everyone out there, the phrase "there is no truth" and everything is relative is not true. It's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And integral philosophy explains to you why this is not the end, that there is truth and goodness.
Wow.
And we're headed in that direction. But postmodernism was just a reaction to modernism, which declared that all truth was scientific.
Right.
This is materialism. And that's not true either. There's some truth in it, but it's not completely true. And so postmodernism was like, whoa, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And they just it was too much of an overreaction.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
It's not true that all truth is scientific, but it's also not true that there is no truth.
Sure, it's never binary.
Right. And so
Wow.
yeah, there is a new stage.
That's crazy.
And there are people that are outlining that new stage right now, and I'm really excited about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So just last question. Does that
Sure.
theory assume then that this has all happened before, or that just X, Y, and Z creates this next stage?
Well, the phenomenon has happened before. So the phenomenon is society is in a certain stage of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And that stage of consciousness has good features and bad features. And at the beginning, you see the good features. But as it gets stagnant, then it starts to go off the rails, and you see the bad features. And as soon as the bad features get bad enough, then people are like, wait a minute, this no longer describes the world. And you have this moment of dissonance, cognitive dissonance. And at a certain point, your worldview collapses, and you look for a new explanation to how to explain the world. And it just so happens that the next stage is the answer to the failure of the previous stage. So, pre-modernism was all about religion, and truth comes from God. And so the Enlightenment and modernism was a response to that, to saying, look, no, there's a lot of truth in this world, and it can be measured, and we can look at it and record, and prove that it's true. And then that went to excess. And then postmodernism came out of that, and they were like, look, there is more in this world than what you can scientifically measure. And so postmodernism, came out in the 1960s and 1970s. And the beginning of it was great. Like, we had
Yeah.
civil rights and
Yeah.
we had
Yeah.
feminism and like all of these great things. And then now things are, getting a little iffy
Crazy.
with like, we're talking about whether free speech is really important anymore and all of those things. And so anyway, an integral view would say that we're at the perfect time where there's a lot of dissonance, where people are going to start looking for a new worldview. And there is one after postmodernism, and like I'm working with some people to try to outline what that looks like, and I think it's really positive because the next one picks the best aspects of all three. So it says, hey, like we need some of these ideas from pre-modernism. Like there is something to be said of like a greater truth that comes from somewhere, and the idea that like growth hierarchies are good, and like there are important things that we learned from modernism. Science is real, individual rights is real, capitalism is a good thing, but all of these are not good in excess. And then postmodernism, there are good things to be taken from that. Like groups of people have been mistreated over history, and it's important that we acknowledge that. And, it's important that we acknowledge that there are feelings that are beyond what science can imagine and measure. And so if you add all of the great things of all three of these, then what you get is something that looks really, it's really hopeful. It's really great. And it's not just, in my opinion, better, but it's something that is not in opposition to what we have. It is something that embraces the good in all three of them.
Right.
And anyone that are in that is in those stages can say, okay, like this makes some sense to me. And so it provides some hope that there is a path that people will follow.
I was literally just going to say that you can any rational person, because they're going to fit into one of those buckets, can piece them all together and say, yeah, okay, this makes sense.
It's a little something for everybody.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is the important piece that you need to get people on board.
Yeah.
To start, expanding and looking at the way that other people look at things.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome, Jeremy. I think it's an art of the fail first, where we go from individual fails, startup fails, to the failures of society. This was awesome. I would love to talk more about that sometime with you.
Sure.
Super fascinating topic. Christian, why don't you finish us off with what I always finish us off with?
Alrighty, I'm definitely out of practice for this one, but is there anyone that you can think of who would be either a good fit or would just have a really good story, maybe similar to your own, that would want to come on the show, or that you think we would need to have on the show?
Or that you think people should hear. The story that people should hear.
A story that, exactly, that people would either really kind of like latch onto, or that would be really fascinating for them to hear.
Yeah. That's a tough question to just answer on the spot.
We're putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of people that are interesting. I don't know. I'm not sure if they would be available. I can think of people that would be available that I'm not sure would be all that interesting. So I'm happy to think it over and
okay.
And if I can come up with something, I'll be in touch with you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Mull it over a little bit.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, we appreciate your time. Amazing conversation today. I think everyone's going to really enjoy it. Anything that you want to leave out on before we shut her down?
No. I mean, I had a good time. I really appreciate you having me coming on.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
And thank you. No, not you. Yeah. Thank you for watching today's episode.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Before you leave, please subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you know when we put out new content. And there's some recent videos somewhere here, okay? Check those out because we got a lot of good content, a lot of good episodes for you, a lot of failures, a lot of fuck-ups, including our own.
That's it.
Right.